Hello and welcome back to the World Championship in Through the Ages. Today we are not going to take a look at one of mine games because those are all already covered. Instead we are going to take a look at a two-player game from the lower 8 group of stage 5 between Zoiedberg and GerisNezus. And the reason why we are taking a look at this game is that it is a very crazy game where some very absurd things are happening. And if you haven't seen this game yet, or maybe one of the other games of Zoidberg, then you can be very excited to see what absurdities are awaiting you today. And it was already known from last year's World Championship that Zoidberg tends to have a little bit of a special play style, especially in two-player games. And then with the current stage, there were again some very crazy games that were shared on Discord. And in the last vote that I had on Patreon, my supporters very clearly decided that we have to take a look at this game on my channel because it's just completely mind-blowing. Alright, and now without further ado, let's start with taking a look at the game. And first we can maybe take a very quick look at the leaders and wonders. And we can see that there is definitely some culture synergy in the game with Fleming, Chaplin, there's Gandhi to hide behind, Hollywood, Internet, there's Gaudi and Shakespeare in H2, also Darwin but no Bach. We have Nobel and Newton for some science leaders, also Steve Jobs and Bill Gates are there. We have the Suez Canal H2, so potentially a colonization strategy could work out very nicely. The railroad is there as well. We have Jan Žižka as the only military action leader in H1. There's Genghis Khan, Barbarossa, Nostradamus who can help with the strength. We have Silk Road but no Universitas. There's the Forbidden City but no St. Peter's Basilica. And no Great Wall, no Himeji Castle. And Zoidberg starts the game and he just picks the engineering genius, so far nothing unusual. GerisNezus goes for the Stonehenge, which I think makes sense. Makes the decision to go for Moses. I think also taking the urban growth and maybe waiting for one of those leaders could be fine, but I mean Moses maybe allows to have some additional populations, which can potentially be put into something like printing press. Alright, now the more special things are beginning to start happening, and Zoidberg does a special opening here. Instead of doing the standard opening with building the third mine, he's actually building a third farm, wants to get some food production going very quickly. And that's of course something that you don't see that often, and that already shows that maybe Zoidberg wants to play the game in a little bit of a different way than we are used to. So already a very special start. He will increase his population, takes the urban growth, takes the frugality, is not willing to pay 2 civil actions for any of those leaders. He can get them for cheaper at the next turn. Also is not willing to go for the Colossus. With the Suez Canal being in there, that maybe could be an interesting wonder with him having the engineering genius, but for now he doesn't want to go for a wonder. Then GerisNezus will go for Moses, builds a mine, increases his population, takes the frugality. Zoidberg first of all will start seeding, has drawn an event, the development of politics is revealed, so even more cards drawn for both of the players. He will make the decision to go for Boudica. She is definitely a very strong leader. Confucius of course can also be very strong, but Zoidberg prefers Boudica here, uses the urban growth to build a second lab, get a little bit of additional science production going, is then not willing to take the Rome roads, instead increases his population with the frugality, can maybe go for Silk Road potentially at the next turn, but my prediction of what I potentially might be doing in his shoes will not lead to the things that Zoidberg will then be doing, so don't be surprised when those things won't be happening. GerisNezus will seed as well. The development of planning is revealed. The options for that are development of civil life, crafts, and development of settlement. And with that, the development of settlement might be potentially the best of those, depending on the game state. GerisNezus chooses the development of settlement, has an additional population, uses the frugality, has now already a lot of additional population, and now even another one, builds 2 stages of the Stonehenge, is willing to delay the second lab for now. He gets some additional science from the Stonehenge, and with that many population, maybe it could potentially be interesting to go into printing presses at some point. Zoidberg will also take the development of settlement, and then it takes the theocracy and the knights. And now is the point where we definitely can start seeing that Zoidberg has maybe a little bit of a military plan in mind. takes the theocracy. The theocracy, especially in two-player games, can allow for some very aggressive starts, and he also takes the knights. With that, has a military technology available that he maybe can start invest into soon, so that's definitely a heavy sign. He doesn't grab the irrigation, doesn't grab the Silk Road, which could potentially be a very interesting wonder to build, doesn't go for the alchemy. Instead he grabs those two cards, and those I think are now definitely very clear signs that maybe he wants to go for a bit of military push, had already had some additional draws from the development of politics. Then GerisNezus seeds, the development of science is revealed, he will finish the Stonehenge, takes the irrigation, and then he develops the irrigation. He could have had a chance to take the swordsman, which maybe could have helped him later on, so that maybe could have been an interesting pick. On the other hand, there is still another copy of knights and swordsmen, so maybe he can be fine without them. But in hindsight, we will be seeing what will be happening. Then maybe that could have been now an interesting time to pick those swordsmen. And with Zoiedberg having already done those picks, we can probably expect some aggressive stuff here. So having the swordsman in hand could be nice. On the other hand, if GerisNezus has already a knight's tactic, and with knowing that Zoiedberg can't deny the knights, of course, it's also completely fine maybe to just wait for the second copy of knights here. Zoiedberg further gives some signs that he has the intention to go for some military, grabs Barbarossa for 3 civil actions, which is definitely quite expensive, but there's no more efficient way to build some military than with Barbarossa. Saving a civil action, a food and a resource per unit that you are building is just very, very strong, and with that Zoiedberg doesn't want to give GerisNezus the chance to take Barbarossa, wants to have him for himself, elects him, develops the knights and uses Barbarossa, and also is building a knight. Normally is now already at 5 strength. It is looking like maybe he could have something like the heavy cavalry tactic, maybe also a medieval army tactic. He has the theocracy, maybe he can do even a revolution at the next turn. He is not grabbing a copy of iron, so he seems to be completely fine with just skipping the mine technology. Also he didn't bother building a 3rd mine after he started with the 3rd farm, so he just starts building some military now. GerisNezus seeds and opens the development of warfare, can take a free warrior, that might help him a little bit to defend himself. He then takes the monarchy, which I think is also a very logical pick. He has a little bit of science lying around, and also the 3rd military action will be very helpful for him to defend himself. Goes for a 3rd warrior. Now, of course, you will have to see which tactic he might be revealing. He then also takes the iron, the printing press, and increases his population another time with Moses. Is now relatively low in science, so can't that easily go into a military tech, which might be a bit problematic for him. He is now heavily investing on warriors, but there is also Genghis Khan coming down the road, which of course could be a way to get some also a nice cavalry tactic going without needing any knights. Zoiedberg takes the free warrior from the development of warfare, does indeed the revolution into theocracy, is now at 7 strength, but he will get even more strength because he is using Barbarossa and plays the heavy cavalry tactic and is now at 13 strength, and that will be a bit difficult for GerisNezus to defend against. So Zoiedberg has now gone for some threatening strength, but he also is operating on 2 mines, so he now might also need to get something out of the strength. But with him having had the draws from the development of politics and with him going for that play, it's definitely not unlikely that maybe he has an aggression here in hand. GerisNezus seeds and opens the developed territory. He's actually able to win it for very cheaply. GerisNezus maybe could have sent those warriors away, but maybe also doesn't want to lower his chances to potentially win an aggression. So GerisNezus wins a colony, and with the Suez Canal being the game, that of course could be nice to have. He then indeed goes for Genghis Khan now. He doesn't know when the knights will appear. Maybe he will at least give it a try to make it that he can defend himself somewhat nicely. He builds 2 warriors, takes the breakthrough, the reserves, reveals the phalanx tactic, goes for Genghis Khan, and takes another copy of breakthrough. Here he could have had a chance to grab the swordsman for 3, which maybe could help him. Maybe he could have even gone into swordsman already this turn, after getting the additional signs from the developed territory, which might allow him to upgrade some warriors later on, but grabbing swordsman for 3 is of course also completely expensive, and those breakthroughs and the reserves will just be very valuable cards for him. With 7 strength, so GerisNezus could potentially defend if he has 3 H1 defense cards, but it's maybe not that likely, so let's see if Zoidberg can play an aggression, and he indeed has an aggression, the Plunder, and will steal 1 resource and 2 food from GerisNezus. Interesting that he takes not 1 resource more, because he could have maybe still done a Barbarossa activation, but maybe he's hoping that he can do another one relatively soon, and that's definitely possible because with only 2 more productions he again can go for another Barbarossa activation. And no, he goes now up to 15 strength with going for another knight with Barbarossa, takes the swordsman, which is maybe mainly a hate draft, and I mean it would have been a very nice technology now for GerisNezus, maybe just being able to upgrade all of those warriors, maybe build an additional swordsman to hopefully soon be in at an amount of strength where he can defend, but Zoidberg is now denying this copy, and now maybe GerisNezus gets punished for not taking those swordsmen earlier on, but that the game is going that heavily into a military heavy direction, and that he maybe the second copy of knights is very late and he ends up on Genghis Khan are of course all things that were not completely foreseeable. Zoidberg takes the swordsman and then just the patriotism, which of course further shows his intentions of just maybe building more military units. Then we are almost at the end of H1, GerisNezus seeds. The knowledge of the ancients are revealed even more science for GerisNezus after already winning the developed territory 1. Zoidberg didn't bother going for a wonder yet. The engineering genius that he has taken at the beginning of the game will now be discarded, and so he also doesn't get anything out of this knowledge of the ancients. GerisNezus will now develop the iron. I think that is mainly for making space in his hand. He will then take the rich land, the urban growth, place the reserves for resources, and then takes another copy of rich land, which will allow him to go for some very cheap upgrades. Will also go for building another warrior. Copying the heavy cavalry tactic is now 9 strength. He can't defend against an aggression, but Zoidberg now didn't have that many more draws, so maybe he can hope that he doesn't get hit by one, and at the next turn he can either go for another warrior or maybe also another knight to actually go for a second heavy cavalry tactic, and then maybe he will be somewhat fine again in regards to his strength. Then H2 starts. Zoidberg seeds. At the moment he has a little bit of a happy face issue, and just at that time he gets very heavily punished here. The rebellion is revealed, so the events so far have been very heavily in favor of GerisNezus, despite him being lower in strength. He won the developed territory very cheaply, got 2 signs out of the knowledge of the ancients, and now Zoidberg will lose all of the civil actions, will just suspend a warrior to not have an uprising, and is now at 14 strength. That is of course quite a big setback, and he basically can't do anything this turn. He will draw his first H2 cards. GerisNezus will go for an upgrade, takes the knights, develops the knights with the breakthrough, still has a little bit of science left, maybe doesn't want to lean too heavily on warriors. I do think that definitely makes sense. He is willing to destroy 1 mine, but can upgrade the 2 others very cheaply with the rich land. Builds now a knight, and now is sitting at 15 strength. And now of course the question is, with GerisNezus having those iron mines, at least the irrigation developed, now also with a little bit of a culture lead thanks to Genghis Khan, now that he is somehow stabilized in strength, maybe is Zoidberg's run now over? How does he come back from this now being behind in strength, and GerisNezus having 4 production while he only has 2? So let's see how he will react to it. GerisNezus, for the moment at least, overtaking him in strength. Zoidberg takes the engineering genius. He has already taken one from HA that he didn't find a way to use, but this time he is taking a wonder, the Forbidden City. I do think that's a wonder that makes a lot of sense for him. He's only in 4 civil actions at the moment, so getting additional civil action will be quite helpful for him, and also those 2 workers are unhappy at the moment, so making it that he can maybe free up some more workers could be quite helpful for him. He builds the knights with using Barbarossa, plays the patriotism, destroys a lab, destroys a warrior, and builds another knight, is going up to 21 strength, and again with that is looking threatening again, with now just having gone for the second heavy cavalry tactic already. But he was also willing to destroy a lab for this, so is further going down in production. GerisNezus is now starting to upgrade his farms. He is of course in a bit of a difficult spot. If he has an H1 colonization card in hand, he maybe could have destroyed something to go for another knight, but the more he destroys, of course, the more it also hurts him, and if he maybe can get some food production going, he will be getting more workers more quickly. Zoiedberg maybe didn't have that many draws, maybe he can have some hope to that he doesn't have an aggression. Maybe also he doesn't have an H1 colonization card, and of course if he draws 3 cards, there's also a somewhat reasonable chance that he maybe can draw an H2 colonization card. So if he has an H1 colonization card, maybe he could have played it safe and built a knight, but of course that also would have been quite expensive, destroying something, and maybe he has some reasonable hope that he won't get hit by something bad. He will just go for 2 food upgrades, takes the patriotism and the breakthrough. He could get the knight of a cannon now, but for now he can't that easily invest into the cannon anyway. He has gotten some draws now, but Zoiedberg has actually another aggression, the Enslave, so GerisNezus gets a bit punished. Also, I think he doesn't have a free population at the moment, so that's definitely a hurtful aggression, and Zoiedberg gets some additional food, some additional resources to maybe build even more stuff. Zoiedberg will take the strategy, develops it, and is now at 24 strength, and with the strategy he has a lot of draws. He will again get 3 draws, and now GerisNezus is starting to be in a very dangerous position, and Zoiedberg, with having now even more military actions, might now get even more reliable on draws, even when he is playing maybe some aggressions or wars. He isn't bother grabbing one of the cannons, maybe he is just fine with staying the heavy cavalry tactic, and with his economy, cannons are maybe at the end just too expensive for him. GerisNezus loses a warrior, increases his population, builds a knight, is now at 16 strength, takes the cannons and takes Nobel. He potentially could have maybe already thought about electing Nobel, copying to the phalanx tactic. He would then lose 2 strength from the tactic, but would gain 2 from Nobel, also would start a little bit of science production. But the disadvantage would be that he has less draws, and maybe he is hoping that there's a chance that he maybe can draw some cards and defend himself. But I think it could have maybe been interesting to go for Nobel here, but maybe also he is hoping to draw a tactic. Something like mobile artillery could potentially be quite interesting if he then finds the time to go for 2 cannons in the near future. And Zoiedberg has another aggression drawn, and GerisNezus has no way to defend, but he at this point would also need 2 H2 defense cards actually to defend himself, which is again maybe a little bit less likely, especially after seeing that he didn't have a single one when Zoiedberg played the aggression the turn before. So Zoiedberg is stealing some science, and now he is starting to do some very interesting things. He first of all goes for Catherine. This turn, before we take a look at what he's actually doing, he could have, for example, just finished the Forbidden City, free up some workers, get a 5th civil action, maybe then grab Catherine with the last civil action, or maybe one of the other cards. But instead, he is doing something different. He will elect Catherine. An additional military action might, of course, be quite nice for him. He then takes the reserves, values those additional resources that he can gain quite heavily, and we can also see why he is valuing them quite heavily, because he will now actually just build 2 more knights and just starts having an uprising. Goes up to 28 strength. He could have finished the Forbidden City maybe to free up some workers, but when he does that, it probably would take quite a while longer to maybe get a 3rd heavy cavalry tactic going, while now he can play the reserves at the next turn. Doesn't have any production, but he can play the reserves for 3 resources that he was willing to take for 3 civil actions, and that is just enough to build another knight at the next turn, making him even more threatening, and he is maybe fine to just let go of the Forbidden City at this point. GerisNezus succeeds and opens the inhabited territory. Zoiedberg doesn't want to lose any strength. Of course, the colony maybe could be useful, but if he sends the knights away, then he can't go for another tactic at the next turn, which he maybe wants to achieve. GerisNezus wins this colony for only 1 warrior, which I think is quite helpful for him. He has now a relatively healthy yellow bank. This turn he will play the urban growth to build a religion, before maybe he will at some point lose it to the end of the age, will destroy a lab, which is of course somewhat costly. Interestingly, he didn't need a happy face yet from the religion. Maybe we will see that it has some hand space issues, but he can potentially also elect Nobel this turn. Let's see if he maybe plans on doing that, because maybe he could have just put a worker that he put into religion now into the military instead of destroying the lab. But of course, as soon when he loses to yellow tokens, the happy face from the religion might become useful. And then he will elect Nobel, takes the frugality, and we can say that he had a full hand at the end of his turn, so maybe he just wanted to get rid of this urban growth. For now, he is very vulnerable to aggressions, but maybe probably he just couldn't do anything about it. Is now at 1 heavy cavalry tactic. He could have also built a warrior, copied the phalanx tactic, but then it's also not that much more strength. I think only 1 more strength because he has then 6 from the tactic, but 1 less from the units. So yeah, that wouldn't be a lot more, and it would cost some very precious military actions, but no, he is now quite behind, has Nobel for some additional science, at the moment has also still a culture lead. Zoiedberg, with having gone into that uprising thing, isn't producing any culture, so while there is this +3 here, no, it is... he isn't actually producing any culture, so GerisNezus can maybe have the hope to at least get a little bit of a culture lead that he maybe can protect. Zoiedberg has another aggression. Of course, a bit fortunate to have that many aggressions, but he has also had a lot of draws, and he didn't have an H2 war yet, and those might be even more dangerous for GerisNezus, so I don't think that's unreasonably lucky or anything that Zoiedberg is getting here. And he has a blunder, is stealing 5 resources, and thanks to those 5 resources, what he could be doing here is to again, before playing that, he had 5 resources and 4 civil actions. He again could have just finished the Forbidden City, get rid of that uprising thing, but at this point he just doesn't bother. He plays to reserve the resources, destroys a lab, builds a knight, builds another knight, is now at 36 strength, has already 10 units of knights, and is looking very, very threatening, and is just willing to stay on this uprising thing, doesn't want to put any resources into the Forbidden City, which is definitely a very interesting decision, but no, he just wants to remain very threatening, will again get 3 draws, has the chance to maybe go for further aggressions or a wars. And no. Of course, an uprising is normally something that you want to avoid at all cost, because the production gets skipped. But the thing is, when your production is that bad anyway, then having an uprising when it maybe allows you to put some even bigger pressure on your opponent is maybe not that much of a burden, or not something that has to be avoided at all costs. So Zoiedberg just now at this point putting all units into the military, going for a lot of strength and trying to get enough value out of those draws and his strength to maybe overcome the still economical and culture gap that he has to GerisNezus at this point. He then takes the justice system, interestingly is not willing to develop it yet, instead wants to take the breakthrough, so maybe if he wants to develop it, wants to develop it with the breakthrough so that he has more science afterwards, maybe has some technologies that he is still hoping to get into, and doesn't want to go too low on science here. GerisNezus this turn blazed the wave of nationalism. Those additional resources will be very helpful for him. He increases his population a bunch of time. Now his nice yellow bank will come in quite handy, allowing him to have that many free population. He will then just build a bunch of knights, goes up to 25 strength, and is coming closer to Zoiedberg. And if Zoiedberg would have gone for the Forbidden City and wouldn't have gone for 2 more knights, he would be at 8 strength less, at 28, and out of the sudden he wouldn't be able to play any aggressions any longer. So we can see here, even though it looks very weird to not finish this Forbidden City and instead just accept this uprising, now if he would have finished it, he would be in a position where he would have lost the pressure for a little while. Maybe he was just not willing to accept that. GerisNezus has now also 2 heavy cavalry tactics of his own going, but is still 11 strength behind, so still very vulnerable. He is still playing the breakthrough to develop the printing press, maybe to make space in his hand, because I'm not sure how much the printing press will be doing for him, but also with his last civil action he maybe didn't have the best alternatives, and at the end was willing to go for this for developing the printing press, which might still, especially with him not having the biggest economy either, might be a nice way to get a little bit of science and culture production in case there will be a bit of breathing room at some point from Zoiedberg. Zoiedberg this turn thinks that it's time to maybe get rid of this Nobel guy. and plays an infiltrate. That is of course a very big setback for GerisNezus, losing the 2 strength, the 2 science for the next turn, Zoidberg gaining a little bit of culture, and now that definitely a very hurtful aggression, and Zoidberg probably wouldn't have been able to go for this aggression if he would have finished the Forbidden Cities, so now he gets a lot of aggressions going during this H2. This turn, after having taken the breakthrough, he is willing to go for the justice system, takes the revolutionary idea to maybe go for some more text potentially, takes the organized religion in hand, maybe at least wants to potentially have the option to go for some happy faces at some point. Interesting that he doesn't take the team spots. There is no Pierre in the game, but if he maybe wants to go for a happy face solution at some point, then because the team spots is cheaper and gives more strength, I thought it could be interesting. Maybe it's also more of a denial. Maybe he wants to deny it from GerisNezus, who has already a religion and maybe would prefer the organized religion, but also for him the additional strength could be useful. So an interesting pick here by Zoidberg. And with that, H2 will end, and we will again see that an engineering genius that Zoidberg has taken will be discarded together with the copy of Swordsman, but that was probably a denial anyway. And now he again will have an Uprising. At this point, he is that heavily committed to an Uprising that it's probably just best for him to stick with it, because if he maybe deletes now some units, the production that he gains then again is just really not worth it at this point any longer, and the strength and the threat that comes together with the strength is probably more important. And then GerisNezus will increase his population, takes the Rifleman, takes the team spots to have happy face solution, is willing to develop it, is now at 0 science, but has the ability to gain some happy faces and a little bit of strength with the team spots. Draws his first H3 cards. Zoidberg this turn actually can't go for any aggression or wars, but he still has Catherine, can use her to steal a yellow token from GerisNezus, which actually is quite annoying for him. It will mean that it will take quite a while longer to get his next population out, and he's basically forced to maybe build a team spots already next turn if he isn't willing to delete anything. And Zoidberg this turn is just taking every bit of resources that he can get from the card draw, takes those reserves for 3 resources, and I guess those cards are just the most valuable for him. Plays the Revolutionary Idea, takes the Cavalryman. I guess those could potentially be interesting to maybe go for some upgrades at some point. GerisNezus Seeds and the Barbarians are revealed. That will cost him a population, which is again quite annoying for him. And then he takes the reserves, the professional spots, dispense the warrior to not have an Uprising, is not building a team spots yet. Interestingly, takes those professional spots. I think the reserves is a must grab for him, but also to deny it maybe from Zoidberg. And then he takes the professional spots, which maybe seems a little bit of a denial because he has already those team spots and maybe doesn't really need a professional spots, especially with his current amount of science. He can't really expect to get into them anyway. And of course it maybe makes some sense. Zoidberg might still try to fix his happy faces at some point, but he has already the organized religion in hand. Of course the professional spots would give him some strength. But at this point, as said, the production that Zoidberg would gain from fixing his Uprising is just not really worth it to just for the production get rid of the Uprising. And maybe the more important denial at this point could have been the fundamentalism, which Zoidberg has the potential to revolt into to gain even more strength, and also GerisNezus, if he maybe gets 1 copy of Revolutionary Idea, maybe there's a world where he at some point can do a revolution into it. So of course the professional spots with looking at Zoidberg's board seems to be a very good card to deny, and who knows, maybe if GerisNezus would have left it to Zoidberg, it could have, maybe he would have made use of it, but I think the more important denial could have been maybe the fundamentalism here. And apart from that, there's not really that much else to do for GerisNezus. Those yellow cards are not really that helpful. Technologies he can't really use, so just maybe going for the reserves plus another denial, I think, is generally a good idea. Again, he is threatening, so let's see if Zoidberg has now an aggression again after he had used Katharina the turn before. And yes, he has drawn an armed intervention. And while GerisNezus had, of course, a bit of a culture lead because both economies are very crippled at this point. Also the one from GerisNezus, despite him not having any uprisings, the culture scores are just very close that even something like an armed intervention, as you can see, will bring the two players very close together. So Zoidberg, without having gone for a war yet, is now already very close to the GerisNezus again. But of course, the kind of civilization that Zoidberg is having at the moment can get heavily punished by impact. So he probably, if he wants to expect to win this game, needs to get into the final impacts with a bit of a lead and not only with being at around the same amount of culture as GerisNezus. Zoidberg gets another copy of reserves and also takes the fundamentalism that he maybe can revolt into, or maybe even go for it peacefully if he gets a revolutionary idea. He then just again has an uprising, but yeah, that's just his thing now. GerisNezus takes a revolutionary idea. That seems to be a very important card, also maybe to deny it from Zoidberg. Then he builds the team spots to get a little bit of additional strength, increases his population, goes for another knight, is now at 26 strength, and now maybe having an H2 and an H3 colonization card could be enough to defend himself. I do think that's not completely unreasonable, so maybe he's now at the range again where he could potentially defend. And Zoidberg, as we see, for the moment doesn't seem to have found any more aggressive cards, and that of course could be quite disastrous for him. He probably needs some more aggressions, or maybe ideally a war to further maybe get some more advantages, and him not being able to use this politics phase is of course quite bad. But of course, especially during H2, he has found quite a lot of aggressions, but also no H2 war, so for now he didn't find any more yet. He then plays the reserves for resources, and plays another reserve for resources, takes the air forces, interestingly. Maybe it's more for denial, because I don't think he can really use those nicely for himself. I'm also not sure how much GerisNezus could use them, so I'm not sure if that was a needed pick, but maybe he also didn't have a lot else to do with his civil actions, and at this point he destroys another mine. I mean, he doesn't have any production anyway, so all those populations here are just free to grab anyway. Those aren't doing anything, so let's just get them into the military, where they will be providing something even when having an uprising. And with going for 2 more knights, he has now 12 military units, goes for a 4th heavy cavalry tactic, is now at 44 strength, and again quite threatening. Gets 4 draws going to maybe hope to get a war on aggression. Again has an uprising, but at this point he has no production left anyway, apart of course from the cultural production. That is of course a little bit painful to lose. Zoidberg gets now some additional resource from the border conflict, which might end up being helpful for him, while GerisNezus has to destroy something, will lose to religion. It's maybe not too painful for him, as he has now is now getting his happy faces from team spots anyway. He is building another knight, plays reserves of food, builds after taking the military build-up another knight, is again 10 strength behind. Again an H2 and an H3 colonization card would be enough to defend here, so maybe he has those, and then if Zoidberg has drawn an aggression, it could happen that maybe GerisNezus can just defend, and then it could be starting to look quite tricky for Zoidberg. And GerisNezus ends his turn with playing the revolutionary idea. Zoidberg has now drawn an aggression again, another armed intervention, and GerisNezus may be a bit unlucky. If he had some colonization card draws, then maybe he could have prevented this armed intervention, which was quite a heavy swing, but Zoidberg is able to pull it off and steals 7 culture from GerisNezus here. Zoidberg then starts destroying some farms, and of course you might be thinking, oh wait, he will have some famine issues soon, but in case you didn't know it, when you have an uprising, your production phase is skipped, and the consumption part, where you have to spend some food, is part of the production phase. As long as you have an uprising, you can't have any famine, meaning that he can destroy those farms and not be in danger of losing any culture to famine, because as we will see at the end of his turn, he will just stay at 2 food as the production step will be skipped. So in case you aim towards a similar playstyle or type of game and want to try it out yourself, that's definitely a very important thing to have in mind. And zoiedberg just goes for more knights, takes the satellites. At this point maybe it's just taking everything that gives a bit of strength, and takes those satellites maybe away from GerisNezus, or maybe to use them for himself. Also, he is again making sure to get 3 draws. Catherine plus strategy plus theocracy is doing some very important work in that regard. And with the second armed intervention, zoiedberg has a little bit of a culture lead now, but GerisNezus has already ceded 2 impacts, and there would be some very, very punishing impacts like harmony, happiness. I mean, a lot of the impacts would just be very bad, and some would be very swingy, so GerisNezus might even need a bit more of a bigger culture lead if he wants to win this game. GerisNezus at this point is developing the riflemen, and maybe instead of deleting those warriors and putting them into knights, he just wants to be able to upgrade them. Plays the military build-up, goes for some upgrades, is destroying a mine, goes for another knight, and at this point is at 40 strength, so now it's quite likely that he can defend himself. Only 1 colonization card would be enough, so he is just going for some more strength, and is then actually taking the space flight. I don't think it's very realistic that he can finish it, but maybe with the help of some events it could be possible, and also the other things that he can do maybe just not really worth it, because flaming isn't doing anything, the technologies aren't doing anything, the efficient upgrade maybe if he builds a mine or farm it and upgrades it, but maybe it's just best to take the space flight and maybe hope that with the help from some events or something there is at least a small chance that he could potentially finish it. Now it's zoiedberg's turn, and now, just before age 3 will end, he has found a warrior culture that he can declare. He will declare it, he will go for a revolution to fundamentalism. Already at the turn before, he made sure to destroy this farm. He didn't use the population immediately, but he planned that maybe if he goes for this revolution now, it would be nice to already have this repopulation, because he can't use a civil action now, of course, to destroy another farm. Builds another knight, has now 14 military units in knights, is at 53 strength. It won't be a very big war, but with those close culture scores, that might still be a very big swing and quite a setback for GerisNezus that zoiedberg now at this late part of the game has actually found a war. Then GerisNezus cedes, and the call to arms is revealed, which will cost him some civil actions this turn, which might help him to defend. GerisNezus starts his defense with destroying a mine. He needs to get some population from somewhere, but he doesn't have that many resources, so he will go for building 1 knight. He destroys another farm, and he then builds another knight, is now at 48 strength. He has 12 knights now, so 4 heavy cavalry tactics himself now, with 2 riflemen, with the team sports, but this is not enough to overtake zoiedberg, who has the strategy and the fundamentalism to give him some additional strength. So while it's not a big war with those close culture scores, it is still a 20 culture swing, and that definitely will help zoiedberg, but it will also be interesting to see what those 3 impacts that GerisNezus has already drawn will do to how many points he will be able to catch up again. And with his last civil action he also took the urban growth, which might allow him to maybe build something at his last turn. Then age 4 starts, zoiedberg steals 10 culture from GerisNezus, and he cedes, so he has maybe found 1 impact where he is somewhat fine in for himself. Opens the iconoclasm, but at this point, interestingly, no player has any leader from age 3 so far, so despite that being revealed in age 4, where it can be potentially quite influential, it isn't doing anything. zoiedberg this turn has just 5 unhappy faces, so an impact of happiness could be a real disaster for him. He is going for Mandela, who is actually not really giving him that much, because the culture he will not producing because of the uprising. The one thing that he is doing is that in case there's an impact of government in the deck, he could get 2 additional points, and zoiedberg doesn't have any else to do anyway, so That is just seems to be the best he can do. He doesn't have enough science to maybe develop a technology with Steve Jobs. Then he is just taking some cards. GerisNezus Seeds has a fourth impact. The impact that is revealed is the impact of architecture, and while this is a very bad one for zoiedberg, GerisNezus also didn't find really the time in this game to build a lot of urban buildings, so he will at least get +2, but at this point he maybe will need a little bit stronger impacts. But with seeding another one, there will be another 3 impacts that will be coming from him, so definitely some chances for him to make up the culture deficit. GerisNezus will in this turn go for Gandhi, disbands the unit of knights, and is interestingly building a printing press. He could have had the resources to build the team sports, and him not doing that is a very big indicator that he hasn't drawn an impact of happiness, which would be a disaster for zoiedberg, so that impact doesn't seem to be in his hands, and the printing press will serve one specific purpose that we will see when the final impacts will be revealed. However, with the printing press not giving a happy face, GerisNezus has to disband another unit of knights to not have an uprising, and he wants to prevent it because the 4 culture could just still be very much worth it. zoiedberg maybe could have thought about just disbanding a bunch of knights to get a 2 culture from Mandela, but then of course if there's something like impact of strength, that could turn out to be a very big one for GerisNezus, so he made the decision to not risk that. And maybe also he has seeded something like impact of competition, or GerisNezus could seed it. He maybe has even the better impact of competition with having Rifleman and the team sports. GerisNezus then takes the revolutionary idea and the patriotism, and then before going into the final impacts, the culture scores are as follows. zoiedberg has a 16 culture lead, which is definitely significant, but with 3 impacts from GerisNezus and zoiedberg's civilization being very heavily punishable through impacts, there is definitely the chance that GerisNezus might now catch up again, and that zoiedberg at the end will get punished for just having Uprising the whole game. The first impact is already a good one, the impact of science, and here we can see how where the printing press comes in, because GerisNezus has now 1 science production, and it is enough to get a 10 culture from the impact of science, bringing him already a bit closer, only 6 points behind zoiedberg. Then the impact of agriculture, that is one that is very bad for zoiedberg as well, but it's also an impact that for GerisNezus is not really that strong. He is coming a little bit closer, but he might need another big impact. But now there's actually a relatively big impact coming for zoiedberg, which will maybe make GerisNezus' chances a bit lower again. The impact of government with zoiedberg having the justice system, the fundamentalism, and also Mandela now, who is now actually contributing 2 points towards zoiedberg's civilization, gives him actually +10 against GerisNezus, who is still only sitting on that monarchy with 5 civil and 3 military actions. So zoiedberg has actually found maybe, I'm not sure if I guess the impact of strength, of course, would have been a very big one for him as well, but impact of government, probably one of the best impacts that he could have found. But there's still 1 impact left. Let's see which one it will be. And it is the impact of culture, so another one that is quite big for GerisNezus, but with the impact of government from zoiedberg, at the end, zoiedberg is actually able to win this game with a 5 culture lead before GerisNezus. Yeah, and with that, we are at the end of a very, very crazy game. As you can see, in order to win a Through the Ages game, you don't need to build anything apart from 14 knights. That is enough to win you a game. And also, who needs production? When you have some bad production, you can just have Uprising and put everything into the military, and then get your production from the card row and maybe through some aggressions. So a very, very crazy game, and just very interesting to see where you can take the game of Through the Ages, to which styles of plays are possible. And of course, you might now be asking, are all of the games of zoiedberg looking like this, the 2-player games maybe at least? And yes, that is actually a style of play, also with that many uprisings that we can see quite often from him. And Lemmings player, retired player who is still active on Discord has taken a look at quite a lot of two-player games from Zoiedberg, and he drew some conclusions that one important factor whether Zoiedberg is going for that type of play is whether Barbarossa is in the game. If Barbarossa is in the game, then he went for that style of play all the time. When there's no Barbarossa in the game, then he also just played some normal games, some culture fests, maybe even sometimes, and played the game in a more normal way. But with Barbarossa in the game, he just very often went for that third farm opening, didn't bother building any infrastructure, valued getting those H1 military techs very highly, valued getting those additional draws and military actions very highly, and then just went for the style of play. And it's just very interesting to see that he is successful with that, because every time in the games of this year's World Championship where he executed this type of play, he has won every single game. So it definitely seems to be working from him, and we will take a quick look at the final standings of the group where those two players were in. And there we can see, as a little spoiler, that Zoiedberg managed to win this group. So he will also be playing in stage 6 with this very extraordinary play style. He made it through to stage 6. Yeah, just very, very interesting to see. Definitely very cool, I think, that a lot of different playstyles and approaches to the game are possible through the ages. I still think that it is a bit of a luck-dependent playstyle. I do think you can execute it very nicely, and Zoiedberg definitely has a lot of success with it. I do think maybe partly it's also the surprising factor that maybe could play a part, that just the opponents aren't really expecting it and also don't have any experience in how to react and how to play this type of play exactly, while Zoiedberg maybe feels very familiar with it. I do think if all of the players have experienced a lot of those type of games, maybe Zoiedberg could have it a little bit more difficult, so maybe a surprising factor plays a part. And then, of course, you are a little bit dependent on the draws, but if you just get some aggressions, maybe some wars. Zoiedberg only drew one war over culture. That's not unreasonable to get. He had, of course, some aggressions, but he also made sure to get a lot of draws. He didn't find an H2 war, which maybe could have potentially been even more threatening to GerisNezus than those aggressions. So it's not that he got completely lucky. I do think he found some good cards, but yeah, and it was, of course, very close, but yeah, it just seems to be working for him. And while I think that maybe it is not the best approach to the game, I mean, Zoiedberg made it to stage 6 of this tournament. Well, I'm out now, so what do I know? And it's definitely just great to see such a different play style, and which leads to some very interesting games, because looking at the Zoiedberg games is just extremely entertaining. If you want to see more of those games, just check out some more of his two-player games. Not in all of them he will go for this type of play, but in a lot of them. So that is just, yeah, it's just very, very interesting, and some very crazy and funny games that result out of this type of play. And yeah, I think GerisNezus didn't make any big mistakes or something. Of course, you can always argue that maybe sometimes he could have done something a little bit different. Maybe not taking the swordsman at the end came to haunt him a little bit. But nonetheless, I didn't make any big mistakes. I think he defended quite nicely, tried to set something up, and it's of course the question how to play against this type of play. Do you just ignore it completely, but maybe you get very punished very heavily if then you get hit by an H2 wall, but maybe you are just taking that risk? Do you very early on just try to also build up some military? How do you react to this type of play? I think there you just maybe need a little bit of experience, or if maybe you play against Zoiedberg, then use this opportunity to try to gather some experience, because that's something that you maybe don't have that often the opportunity to. Alright, but now enough with talking a lot about this. Just maybe we can take one last time a look at this beautiful civilization here. with just a lot of knights and Uprising. No wonders, no technologies apart from some here and the knights, but no urban buildings or farmer mine upgrades. Everything destroyed apart from one farm and then just 40 knights. Yeah, that's just completely crazy. Alright, let's take a quick look at the standings from this group and see how this group ended, where those two players were in. And in the standings we can see that it was actually very close in that group. Both Zoiedberg and GerisNezus ended the group with 26 points, and that of course also means that the outcome of the two-player game that we just saw at the end decided which player made it through to stage 6 of this tournament. So it was very close. I mean, GerisNezus, if he only maybe found the defense cards to defend against one of the armed interventions or something, it could have gone the other way, and GerisNezus would have made it to stage 6 with a very strong amount of 30 points. So he definitely played very strong in the stage, also finishing before Gross, who is a very strong player with some very strong results recently, who is now out of the tournament. But at the end, it is now Zoiedberg who will be continuing in the tournament, and I, and maybe also some of you, will be very excited to see what he will be doing in stage 6. Can he, with the specific type of play, get further success? Will we see some more very crazy games from him, especially with the two-player games? As you can see, he won all of his 3 two-player games in this stage, and yeah, so that will just be very interesting to see. And then I hope it was a very interesting game for you to look at. I think just very mind-blowing and something that you definitely don't see usually, and just very refreshing to see that such a type of play apparently is definitely somewhat successful. Zoidberg made it to stage 6, so just completely mind-blowing. And yeah, so I hope it was very interesting and entertaining for you to take a look at this game. And then I say thanks for watching. The next video that will be coming will be another one that was voted for by my patrons, and after that the Intermezzo Championship will start relatively soon, I think. So then I think I will probably cover the Intermezzo Championship, as that might be the most interesting tournament that is going on at the moment to cover then. Alright, then thanks for watching, have a nice time, and see you in the next video.